Welcome, everyone. This is the Shooting It Straight podcast. I am producer John, here as always with Justin Jackson. This is an exciting week for the show because we have real basketball to talk about. Last week we were talking all theoretical based off the summer scrimmages that were months ago. This week we have real live game action to talk about as we'll break down UNC's blue white scrimmage, which took place on Saturday in Chapel Hill. Before we get into the show, I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to our sponsors, Johnny T-shirt on Franklin Street and Congruity HR. And one final note as well for people watching and listening tonight. We're always live on YouTube, 8 p.m. Mondays. You can check us out live on the Inside Carolina YouTube channel. Join us in the live chat. Ask Justin a question. Last week, we really enjoyed those questions that you all submitted. Justin, how's it going? And did you enjoy watching Saturday's scrimmage, North Carolina against North Carolina?
Yeah, man. Everything's good on this end. Excited for this one because we actually get to talk about basketball and not what ifs and lineups and all that sort of stuff. It gives us actually something to really dig into. For one, it's nice to see them get to go up and down the floor. I think one thing is watching that. It reminds me of how um, even though we're excited to watch it, it's really just a glorified practice, almost glorified practice scrimmage. But obviously, for a bunch of new guys, it's good to get out and play in front of the crowd. And I know I heard Cade mention, it looks a little bit different whenever those uh, bottom bleachers are pulled out. So obviously, cool to give them the opportunity to kind of get out and kind of see how it goes out there on the court with the fans and everything like that. So definitely exciting, and it was fun to watch.
Yeah, let me bring our viewers up to speed a little bit. If you didn't have a chance to go to the Smith Center on Saturday, by the way, we want to mention it was a fundraiser game for everyone that was impacted in Western North Carolina. So be sure to support Western North Carolina if you can, and we're keeping them in our thoughts certainly. But as for the basketball on the court, the blue team consisted of James Brown, Elliot Cadeau, Cade Tyson, Seth Trimble, and VAL as their starters, whereas the white team had RJ Davis until he got hurt. We already see a question about that in the chat, so we'll address that injury later on in the show. They had Drake, Ian, Jalen Washington, and Jalen Withers with Ty Claude coming off the bench. And from a scoring perspective, Seth Trimble with 19 points certainly stood out on the box score. For the white team, Jalen Washington, 11 points on 4 of 7 shooting. And we've already talked a lot about rebounding so far in this offseason. 6 rebounds for freshman James Brown to go along with 9 points. So a really strong performance from the freshman. And we'll talk about him a little bit more tonight. Justin, when you had an opportunity to look at the footage from the game, what's the biggest thing that stood out for you?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me that I think is going to be a lot different for a lot of fans that have watched Carolina basketball for a long time is I don't think there was a single post up at all the entire time. Um, Obviously, we're used to seeing Armando on the block. When I was there, we were used to having two bigs on the block almost the entire time. And I don't think I can think of one time that there was a simple post up and feed a guy in the post. And with this team, with the size and the question marks as far as who's going to be that big to step up, I think the way that they played was kind of the most intriguing to me. I think last few years you've seen a lot more pick and roll and a lot more open concept that they've played out of. But I mean, just watching that scrimmage, that's all they played out of. It felt like every single time down the floor, it was some sort of pick and roll action, a guard getting downhill. I know we talk about it a little bit in a little bit later, but getting to the mid range a lot of drop offs, which I think for this team is going to be the key to getting those paint attacks. There's so many different ways to get paint attacks, whether that is feeding the post and somebody being able to score down there. But I think for them, it's going to be a lot of cuts, a lot of guards getting downhill, touching the paint, kickouts, drop offs, whatever that might be. So I think that was probably the most intriguing thing that stood out to me. Was just it's a different way of playing basketball, and I know we had talked about, and there was some footage of some drills that the bigs were doing before the scrimmage, and it looked a lot different than whenever I was there. It was a lot of, catching in the pocket off of a pick and roll and kicking it out, as opposed to when I was there, it was either left shoulder, right shoulder, counter, favorite, for the big. So, it's definitely a different way of playing, but I think for this team, I think it's going to be the way to go.
I'm just trying to imagine Bryce Johnson, Isaiah Hicks, Kennedy Meeks doing shooting drills where they're in the corner shooting corner threes. I'm sure they would have loved it, but I don't think Roy Williams allowed a lot of that from the big men. We're going to take an opportunity here. We have the ability to show some highlights today. So for those of you listening on podcast, you'll miss out a little bit on this. We'll narrate some of the plays that we're going to talk about in more depth later. But for our YouTube viewers, they can check out some of the highlights here. This is focused on the freshmen. But Justin, I wanted to build on your point about cutting because that's something that I noticed as well. Drake had a few really good cuts in the game on Saturday. He's someone who's really long and athletic, and it feels like he already has great instincts as a basketball player. So that was good to see him be able to cut to the basket. And then Cade Tyson as well impressed me from a cutting perspective. If you look at the box score from him and his shooting numbers on Saturday, it didn't jump off the page too much. He was 6 of 11 from the field and 0 for 3 from 3-point range. But he had some really good cuts on Saturday,
Mhm.
athletic around the rim. I think that's a positive sign for UNC that they're getting that. And you add that to Jalen Withers, who I believe is an excellent cutter. And then you have a point guard in Elliot Cadeau, who's always going to find you. I think that's the building block for a really good piece of half court offense there.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have a team that doesn't necessarily have a ton of knockdown shooters all around the floor, there's got to be other ways to get the players that maybe are being helped off of, or maybe the defense is not taking them as serious of a shooting threat. There's got to be ways to get them involved. So, like you had mentioned, there's a lot of cutting kind of going on. I think a thing for me that I'm very interested to see if it continues is guys like Drake, guys like Jay Withers, even guys like Ian kind of getting downhill, and really causing issues from that standpoint. I think a lot of times, especially with somebody like Drake as a freshman or Ian as a freshman, and even Cade, like we talked about, um, getting downhill on cuts is easy to kind of get a rhythm. All it takes for a shooter is to kind of feel that one time getting the ball, one time seeing the ball go through the rim. So one thing that I liked about when it comes to that was somebody like Cade, who coming in, it's 46% from three. Can he do that for this team? Can he be a floor spacer? Can he knock down shots? Something that I love from him, obviously, going 0 for 3, a lot of people are, probably questioning, well, is this guy really a knockdown shooter? You can always tell if somebody's a shooter if they have what I call gravity. If a player causes a closeout every time that they get the ball, then more than likely they're a knockdown shooter. And you saw a lot of times when Cade got the ball, whether it was Drake guarding him or some other guys, whenever he would get the ball, it was every time it was a hard closeout. So a lot of times you saw him playing off of a closeout, getting to the mid-range game, finishing at the rim, getting fouled, things like that. And if he's able to do that, that's just icing on top of the fact that he is a knockdown three-point shooter. So that was one thing that I was very encouraged from seeing, is even though he went 0 for 3, and I think he had an air ball
Hmm.
to start the game for him, he was still causing the defense to draw towards him even when he got the ball. So that's going to be big for them. I think watching this game as it went on, you just kind of saw, and I've seen it in interviews, and obviously Coach Davis has hit on it a ton, but um, just Elliott's maturity from the standpoint of his pace. He's always been a playmaker. Last year, he had some unbelievable making plays for other people. But just seeing his change of pace, whether it is coming off the ball screen and hesitating for a second, then getting downhill, or him just getting into the paint and taking a second to kind of see everything around him, whether it's he needs to kick it out, float it, drop it off to the big. I think that's going to be something really fun to watch as the season goes on. Is just kind of seeing how he really, takes control of the floor. And so you see obviously him, but the biggest question mark I think for me is, okay, how are we going to get the ball into the paint? How are we going to cause issues inside? Hopefully guys like RJ, Cade, and other guys can step up and knock down shots from the outside. But unlike the other years in the past, it's really, okay, how are we going to cause problems inside? And I think somebody like Seth, with his ability that you kind of saw in the scrimmage of getting downhill, getting into the paint, um, for me, I'm obviously going to be a huge proponent for floaters and getting to the mid range. That's kind of how I made my money per se. But just being able to get to the paint. And a lot of times you saw, there were a lot of floaters and jumpers kind of in that mid range, but there's also a lot of times you saw them get into the paint, kick out, um, and cause issues like that. I think that just getting teams into rotations with that is going to be key for this team. So there's a lot of points and a lot of things that we can kind of talk about, but I think those things, seeing Cade play, seeing Elliott with his pace and his maturity from that standpoint, um, and then just seeing guys like Seth be able to create getting downhill and getting into the paint, I think was encouraging for me when it comes to that question mark of how are we going to get the ball inside and cause the defense to collapse at times.
And one big piece of that is potentially James Brown, the freshman center. It stood out to me how well he connected with Cadeau in some of the pick and rolls and some of the passes that they were able to connect on. Thus far, everything we've heard about James is that he's more of a developmental prospect, that he's a little bit younger and maybe isn't as ready to play right away. But from what I saw exclusively on Saturday, just basing my opinion off of that, I mean, he looked like he might be able to contribute this season. He has some feel around the rim. He has the ability to kind of provide some of that size that maybe UNC doesn't have on the roster as more of that true center. I already touched on his box score a little bit. 9 points on 4 of 6 shooting. He was 1 for 2 from the foul line, 6 rebounds. He did have 3 fouls in limited minutes, 19 minutes, was credited with 3 blocks as well. He's going to be a piece that UNC maybe can turn to. It's a long season. You never know what happens in terms of the rotations and things like that. Justin, specifically for him, you've gotten to watch James more than I have. You might have a little bit more background about his development. Is he someone who impressed you in this scrimmage, and do you think he maybe is more ready to help UNC than you thought?
Um, I think as far as figuring out people's roles,
Mhm.
and as far as um, who can contribute and who can't, I think it's way early to assess that. Um, And on the other hand, I will say that James did definitely impress me. I think um, just his presence, right? Like just his ability to, like you said, you saw some block shots. You saw him playing defense in the pick and roll. His presence is, I mean, he's a big fella down there. And so seeing that, seeing him get to the offensive glass, and getting some putbacks and drop offs, and like you said, playing well with Elliott, um, it shows definitely glimpses that he could step in and give North Carolina something. I think for him, it's going to be a lot about matchups, and I think it's going to be, for him, he was matched up against Jay Wash the majority of the time, who was more of a finesse kind of pick and pop type of guy. What happens whenever we have a big that's, you know, Hunter Dickinson against
Mhm.
Kansas? Is he able to stand in there and do the same thing, have a presence, and be able to play, defense against a guy of that big and that strong. I think only time will tell. But he definitely impressed me. I mean, I think his presence is what really hit me was okay. James Brown is out here on the floor. It's easy for freshmen and guys like that to kind of fall and you don't really notice him much, but you definitely notice his presence and hopefully he can just kind of every single day build on it and build on it and by the first game or by the end of the season, he's somebody that's contributing a lot. Um, so I think he definitely helped himself. I think he definitely looked well, and you can definitely see that he has gotten better over the summer. I will say that you can definitely see he's putting in work, um, even on his body, and then even on the court. You're kind of seeing, you know, the maturity level just in a few months of kind of him getting to college and getting used to that.
I want to give a shout out to our live chat here for a second. We've got some of the staples of Inside Carolina live chats. Sean Crowley, shout out to you. You're here every single week. Brian Evans, and we're getting close to 100 live viewers. So appreciate everyone for watching. And in honor of the chat, we have some great questions in here. So I'm going to pull up one of these right off the right off the bat for you to answer, Justin. I'm going to go to the two box here while I do this so we can pull up this question. This question is from Travis Faircloth. He asks, "What's up, J&J?" That's a good name. I hadn't thought of that, but we are J&J. Have you ever played on a team this small before? Can speed beat size in March? Justin, what do you think of Travis's question?
I think when you look back at the team that won the championship, um, our biggest guy was, I guess, Tony Kennedy, so 6'10". Um, and I think during that time, I think you needed to have some real bigs um, to have success as a team. I think now with the way that basketball is going, just in general, I think that there's an ability to play small that can actually you can take advantage of other teams. We've talked about it. I could very easily see, lineups at times having Jay Witt at the five. And so everything on defense, you're just switching. Everything on offense, it's basically positionless. And especially with the way that they're playing offense with this open concept, swinging the ball from side to side, get into a pick and roll. You can even get into a pick and pop with guys that are smaller. I don't necessarily know that you have to have bigs, um, that play 30 minutes a game to really win when it comes to March. I will say that you have to have somebody to be able to step up and somebody to be able to hold their own, especially with, when you've got guys like Hunter Dickinson still in college, you've got some other bigs. I know the team down the road's got some bigs as well. So you've got to have somebody be able to step up and, kind of take that role of, okay, if there's another big on the other team, I got to be able to step in and, do everything I can to slow him down. But with how fast and the way that this team looks like they're trying to play, I don't necessarily know if it's, the end of the world that they don't have a true big or multiple bigs like we did back whenever we played. So I think it's just kind of time will tell, kind of if they're hurting at that position or if they're able to take advantage of it.
I think, Justin, we might have to draw on your G League experience a little bit here as well. I think you've spent some time at the five, maybe on the second day of a back to back or something like that in the G League. So I think even you have had a little bit of experience there, banging a little bit down low. Basketball's changing, you know. There's priority on spacing, priority placed on shooting, and it's just definitely a different game. I want to take a second to pull up one of our clips here that Justin and I will be breaking down. So again, for those of you listening on podcast, I'm going to do my best here to narrate this, but we thought this would be a really cool feature for our listeners and viewers to kind of get some live film breakdown here from Justin. So I'll pull the clip up and I'll kind of talk through it. Um, this first clip is a half court possession for the white team. We're looking at the ball getting swung around a little bit, and we're really focusing on the positioning of the players. Good defensive slide there. Ultimately, the shot goes in for the basket. But Justin, when you pulled out this play from the highlight reel, what stood out to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we talk about is kind of, and you can pause it. I think the biggest thing when we talk about it is, okay, are we going to be able to space the floor? Are we going to be able to make these teams really guard us on the perimeter so that we can get those driving lanes, and those cuts and those things like that that we talk about to get pressure on the rim? And so when I watch when I watch a clip like this, now obviously this is the first scrimmage of the year. There's probably nerves and things like that playing in front of the fans for the first time and things like that. But when I watch a play like this, so you had Drake bring up the ball, you had him do a dribble handoff. Now he's going to kick it back to Jay Witt. And for one, I think the biggest thing for an offense whenever you're trying to play an open concept is you want to get the ball to go back and forth. So from one side to the other. On this whole clip, the ball just stays on the right side of the floor. So that's the first thing. The second thing, if you want to run the clip a little bit, so now you have Drake space to the corner. You've got a drive, you've got a kick. I think one of the biggest things for freshmen, whenever it comes to getting used to playing in college basketball as opposed to high school, um, the windows of being considered open are way smaller. And it's the same as you go even further professionally. Um, so a kick like this, if this was defense in high school, then the guy that's playing defense probably would never get back out there to the corner. So you have time to kind of set. If you're somebody that likes to shoot with the seams, you can kind of get the seams right and let it fly. In college, if you run it back just a little bit, in college, if you catch the ball and you're in the corner like this, that either has to be a jump shot right there, which for me personally, as a shooter and as a more offensive guy, if you can get a drive kick and you've got the defender helping and having to get back out, I think that's a shot every single time. Now, obviously, the coaches might have a you know, different idea of what they want for the offense. But if it's not a drive kick shot, then you have to take the ball away from the defense. So you just had a drive there. Now Drake gets the ball, he doesn't shoot it, and he takes it right back to the player and the defender that was just in the action. Um, so I think for me, when I watch kind of some of these clips, I think for one, it's okay, does that need to be a jump shot right there for Drake to keep the defense honest and to give himself some confidence as the game goes on? If not, I think as a freshman, you have to realize where the defense is, where the ball's coming from. Okay, look, that's an easy rip baseline. Now let's see what happens. So I think, like we talk about with freshmen, it takes some time, right? It takes some time. You think maybe you're not as open when really in college, that's about as open as you're probably going to get at times. So when I watch clips like that, it's just for me, it's okay, that's a freshman, right? Like you've got to just kind of learn and see and feel it out and kind of know when it is your time. Okay, if I see my defender almost in the paint helping on a drive, this has to be a shot. Because at the end of the day, that's probably the best shot we're gonna get that entire possession. If the rest of that clip was basically the guard getting the ball back, having to make something happen and shoot a mid-range pull-up jumper. So that's kind of why I picked that play out because it was, as a freshman, it's just a matter of learning and getting more comfortable and seeing, okay, this ball's coming to me. I got to be ready to let it fly because I'm not going to have as much time to do it as I did in high school.
And I'm glad you brought that up with Drake as well because he spent so much time in high school with the ball in his hands. He was a wing when he went and played on some of the summer league circuits, but for Northwood, he was their point guard. He was their he was holding the ball a lot in that
Mm-hmm.
offense, and he was setting up his teammates. That also is a strength for UNC because in the second half, when RJ went out, he was one of the ones who was initiating the offense a lot, and that's a skill that UNC is going to be able to use throughout the season. But I think that's a great example from that specific clip. When you're on the strong side there, the ball swings to you. Use your athleticism. You're an excellent athlete. Drive right to the basket and take that one in. We have one more clip for us. I'm going to actually pull up some highlights first while I do the ad read. This is a fun benefit of having the rights to the footage. While we're listening to the ads, we can watch some more highlights here. I want to take a quick second to shout out our sponsor, Johnny T-Shirt again. there on Franklin Street for all of your UNC sports needs for apparel, for gear, anything you need. They have it at Johnny T-Shirt. Be sure to support them on Franklin Street or online because they support us and our show. And also, we want to give a shout out to Congruity HR. They also sponsor all of Inside Carolina's podcasts, and they're a great friend of IC. So we appreciate both Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring this show. Justin, I'm going to bring up our second clip of the night. A little bit of a theme. This one also has to do a little bit with Drake, but there's a difference in how this possession plays out. Maybe a little bit of growth from the freshman in his first game in a UNC uniform in the Smith Center. I'm going to narrate this again for our podcast listeners. It's just a simple action, and the ball gets swung to the weak side of the court. Again, Drake gets the ball. He kind of pounds it a little bit, swings it back out to Ian Jackson. One thing I'm realizing as well is that I'm a terrible play-by-play announcer, so I apologize to everyone at home. But the ball goes back to Drake Powell, and he shoots this shot. Justin, when you're watching a clip like this, what stands out to you? And maybe is this an example of Drake kind of being more of that catch-and-shoot guy that second time when the ball gets swung to him?
Yeah, it's funny because this was actually in the first half. So,
Mhm.
when I watch this, it's kind of the same what we talked about. You've got a certain action up top. He spaces the corner, which at times I think might be kind of where he ends up, just with the way, you usually when you're running the floor, you finish and you get out to the corners if you're not, the one with the ball. So, you get the action where you get downhill, you get RJ to get into the paint and make the defense collapse, like we talk about. That's exactly what you want to happen. And he doesn't get it. And like we talked about in the last clip, Kate Tyson looks like he's, you know, pretty far off of him from at least from my standards. But for somebody coming from high school, a lot of times when somebody's in the paint like that, you've got all the time in the world to get the shot back off. But anyway, so they kick it to him. He gets it. He kind of hesitates, kicks it back. Well, then you get another drive. So from the offensive perspective, this type of possession is exactly what you would want to see. You get one paint touch, kick out. You could have shot it, didn't get it, rotate it. You get another drive, a great pass from Jay Witt. Um, and now he actually ends up shooting a tougher shot than the first shot probably would have been. And so I think for this team, I think the number one thing is being able to get paint touches and being able to get guys downhill. You might not necessarily see all of the post ups to where you get guys into the paint from the post, but having these guards come off these pick and rolls and playing off closeouts and making the defense collapse from that standpoint is what's going to open up everything else. So now, if you did your first job in making the defense collapse and making them shrink in on you and you kick out and make the right read, now that's up to whoever you're kicking the ball out to step into the jumper with confidence and knock it down. And obviously, second time around, Drake stepped in and knocked it down. But something to watch, I think, throughout the year is, can these guys, obviously, you see Ian right here on this clip ready to knock it down too if he goes one more. Can these guys shoot it consistently so that now, as these actions happen and there's kickouts, now they can play off of a closeout and they can start getting downhill and really playing to what their real strengths are right now. So, I think that's an encouragement to see the offense run like that, and then obviously to see him step in and knock that down the second time around. I think it's just a matter of kind of watching and seeing if these freshmen are able to kind of get adjusted to the speed and the difference in the closeouts and the difference in the defense that you kind of see at the college level as compared to the high school level.
And I think the key word there is hesitation, because if you look up and down the roster, UNC has a few hesitant shooters. You hit on two of them already, Drake and Ian, but I would throw Cadeau and I would throw Seth Trimble in that category, kind of for different reasons, right? Because if you look at the numbers last year, Seth was a 42% three-point shooter. He was 13 of 31. But again, 31 attempts compared to, let's say, RJ Davis, who had 284 three-point attempts, not in the same universe. And even in the scrimmage on Saturday, there was a point where, Seth was behind the 3-point line. He kind of worked his way into the mid range, and maybe he's more comfortable there. So is the hesitation gone from his jump shot? And then Cadeau, it's the same story. He's going to face defenses throughout the entire season that sag off of him. Is he going to hesitate if he gets an open three at the top of the key? Or is he going to be someone who is going to just step right up and shoot? He was 1 for 1 on his threes on Saturday. He's talked a lot about this offseason, how much he's worked, all the work that he's put in. So it'll be really interesting to see the progression there. And I think, Justin, that's something we're going to be talking about a lot throughout the season. I'm going to hit on a few listener questions here before, Justin, we close things down. I do want to hit on this question. This has been something that multiple viewers have touched upon. This one is from Clee112. What is going on with RJ? So if you missed the scrimmage on Saturday, in the second half, RJ went down with the official word from UNC was, I believe, a right back contusion. I apologize. Let me get the exact language because I do not want to misquote. Um, well, RJ, there was an announcement from UNC about RJ's injury. Um, from what I saw, it did not look like a hard fall, but I think his status for tomorrow's game is in question there. So, not to speculate too much, but we'll talk a little bit about that when we start to preview tomorrow's game against Memphis. And then I'm going to pull up another question here from the chat. This is a fun question here from Melinda Dolphin. Who do you think will be the best glue players? I think, Justin, last year you talked about the X factor being Harrison Ingram and all the little things that he did for the team. Kind of the same kind of archetype here. Best glue players, who's going to do the little things for this team? Justin, who do you think that might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have a guy returning that has played as much Carolina basketball as he has in Seth, I think it's hard to not say him because of all the things that he does. I think obviously you hope that he, is a very, key contributor when it comes to scoring the ball and everything else. But I think as far as glue, I think Seth can be that guy. I think eventually, I think Drake can be that guy, especially once they kind of figure out the different rotations and minutes and things like that as the season goes on. I think Drake with his ability. I mean, if you watch that scrimmage, I mean, he started the game out with a getting in the passing lane and stealing it. Then he had a floater. I think that next possession we just saw where he knocked down a 3-point shot off a kick out. He had an unbelievable two-handed block down the middle of the lane. So there's just so many things that Drake can do for this team. So I think those two guys are kind of the ones to watch, kind of see how the team goes off of their contributions as the season goes on. Um, so I think that's probably one of the more intriguing things to watch as the season goes on is just kind of you know how do those guys step into that role of being the glue guy, but also being a key contributor, night in and night out.
Awesome. Thank you, Melinda, for that question. I'm going to pull up one more question here from George Jenkins. This one might cover my face slightly. Not too bad. George asks, why do we not see as much full court press anymore? Are the guards, ball handlers too talented and you end up giving easy looks? Justin, what do you think it is there? Is it fatigue? Is it better athletes, better ball handlers? Is that something that you were comfortable doing when you were playing, going full court press like that?
I I was never a big fan of pressing in college. I think now, especially because you see how talented these guards are. I mean, just going off of this team, if you try to press a guy like Elliott or even a guy like RJ, it takes 1, 2 moves, and all of a sudden now you're on a 5-on-3 break and you get whatever you possibly want. So I think pressing and doing full court, I think, is a good changeup. Now, I do like kind of pressuring the point guard as far as just playing regular man to man and the guard picking them up full court. Um, I do kind of like that because it just kind of makes the other team speed up their offense a little bit. They can't just move the ball as easy as possible. I think at times, maybe if you need a burst of energy, maybe your team's kind of in a lull. I think the coach throwing you into a quick little 2-2-1 press and getting one or two traps and kind of speeding their offense up and making them use up clock. I think that's always a good way to play. But as far as just playing full court press and just trying to have that pressure the entire game, I think guards have always been good, but now I think these point guards that are out there are just too quick and too their ball handling ability is just too tough to really get them trapped. So I think it's definitely a situational thing. As far as just throwing it at them every once in a while, but it's just tough to kind of do it throughout the entire game, especially the other tough thing is too with how fast Coach Davis wants them to play offensively, eventually that can kind of take a toll. But maybe we see a little bit more because of the depth that they have at guard this year, and on the wing. Maybe we see a little bit more pressure and just kind of aggressiveness on that side of things. But I think that's kind of why you've seen the press kind of start to dwindle down a little bit as compared to years in the past.
I want to give another shout out to our live viewers here, 143 of you watching us live on a Monday night. So we appreciate all of you. Keep in mind, we'll be live every Monday night throughout basketball season, including live after UNC's first game of the season. So actually, let me give a chance to talk a little bit about the schedule that's upcoming because UNC has some games on their docket in the near future. We already talked a little bit about the Memphis game. They play Tuesday, October 15th, tomorrow at 7 p.m. in Memphis against Memphis. And we want to give a shout out as well. That's the Hoops for St. Jude Tip Off Classic. So another charity game there. Great to see UNC supporting that great cause. Then the final exhibition of the season is Sunday, October 27th at 2 p.m. against Johnson C. Smith before the season tips off November 4th, a Monday night at, I believe, 9 p.m. against Elon in the Smith Center. So, Justin, looking at that game tomorrow, UNC has an opportunity to play a very solid Memphis team. Again, we don't want to speculate, but potentially not have RJ Davis on the court as well as he recovers from his injury. What are you looking for in that game against Memphis?
I think there's a few things that you can look for going into this game. I think a game like the scrimmage that they just had, with it kind of being a glorified practice, these guys have beat up on each other all summer long, and they've picked up on each other's tendencies. They kind of know what guys want to do within the offense and on defense and things like that. So I'm interested just to see how everything that they've done this summer translates against another team that they don't know, and that the other team doesn't know their actions and things they run. Um, I think obviously, like we've talked about almost this entire show, is what bigs step up, against whatever other bigs Memphis has. Who can kind of step in and be that, five man that this team needs. Um, and then if RJ isn't there, I mean, obviously for RJ himself, he's played so much college basketball that missing this game isn't the end of the world. But for the rest of the team, who is able to kind of step into that leadership role, whether that's Elliott or Seth or even a guy like Ian or Cade, who can kind of step into that leadership role and kind of keep this ship running. And then who are they able to lean on for scoring? I think that's probably the second biggest thing is who's going to be the scorer. Um, we talk about who's going to be the second scorer behind RJ, but so in this game, who's going to be the main scorer and who's going to step into that role? So I think those are the few things, and then just to be able to see this team, in Coach Davis loves saying the word, but just in live action outside of their practice jerseys, in the Dean Dome against each other. I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing is just being able to see them go against somebody different. Um, and how do they guard against, guys that are maybe different from the guys they've been guarding in practice. And how do they play offensively against guys that maybe, guards that maybe are a little more physical, a little more aggressive, maybe some guys that are older that have been in college now that are, stronger than some of these freshmen. How do the freshmen kind of handle that and, kind of keep going? So, I think it's gonna be fun to watch. Obviously, I hope RJ's back is, you know, healing and he'll be totally fine. And I think you also, this is outside of basketball, but I think it's way more important. You hit on at the beginning of this show. I think um, definitely keeping these people in North Carolina in our prayers that were hit by this hurricane. I think that's way bigger than basketball in any scrimmage and podcasts and anything like that. So definitely sending out my love and prayers to the people that were affected from the hurricanes. And hopefully, this game coming up and as the season gets going, that kind of gives an outlet to kind of get away from, the disaster that kind of happened there. So, but once again, just sending all the loves and prayers out to the people affected and the people whose families were affected. I hope everything is going well, and I hope, as much as possible, everything can kind of get back to normal as time goes on.
Yeah, certainly agree there. I have two specific players that I'm keeping an eye out for tomorrow. I'm going to keep an eye out for Ty Claude and Ven Allen Lubin, two transfers for North Carolina. Both played solidly in the game on Saturday. They didn't flash, but they were solid. Then Allen Lubin had 10 points. Ty Claude had 5 points. I'm curious to see what UNC has in those players. Are they going to be able to be key rotation players for this team? Are they someone who stands out because they sort of have more of that physicality, that sort of Power Five ACC type size and length, and that will matter against a team like Memphis? So those are the two players specifically that I'm going to be keeping an eye out for. Justin, the final word goes for you. You can take it however you want. Take us out of here. Monday night, 139 people watching us live. Appreciate everyone listening. Justin, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, once again, thank y'all for coming and hanging with me and John. It's always fun to get on here. Like I had said, right before this, obviously prayers, and I'm going to continue to say it, prayers and love being sent out to everybody affected by the hurricane. Um, and the season's almost here. So I hope everybody enjoys this week and is able to enjoy a little North Carolina basketball tomorrow. Um, and yeah, we're super excited. So I appreciate everybody and can't wait till next week.